The evacuation alarm had been screaming for 47 hours. Norvith Quinn pressed her six-fingered hands against the viewport of the failing orbital station, watching the last transport ship disappear into faster-than-light transit without them. The vessel carried diplomats, wealthy merchants, and government officials, anyone who could afford the exorbitant fees the Galactic Rescue Consortium demanded for passage off the dying colony world. Everyone else had been deemed unrecoverable assets. "They are really leaving us," whispered Talis, her younger brother. His crystalline skin patterns had gone dull with despair. At 14 standard years, he was too young to understand the full cruelty of what was happening. The council promised they would save everyone. Norvith wanted to comfort him, but the truth was inescapable. Below them, on the surface of Calthara Minor, 3 million Salvari colonists waited for rescue ships that would never come. The planetary core had become unstable, a cascade failure triggered by decades of aggressive mining operations. Seismic events were increasing exponentially. Within 6 days, the entire planet would tear itself apart. And the Galactic Council had decided they were not worth saving. The cost-benefit analysis was clear. Council Administrator Thex had announced coldly during the final transmission. Evacuating 3 million individuals from a failed colony requires resources that exceed the economic value those individuals represent to galactic society. The Rescue Consortium has determined that only priority personnel qualify for extraction. All others are classified as acceptable losses. Acceptable losses. 3 million lives dismissed with accounting terminology. Norvith had worked as a structural engineer on Calthara Minor for 18 years. She had helped build the underground hab complexes that housed the colony. She had designed the reinforcement systems that kept the mining tunnels stable. She had contributed to galactic civilization with skill and dedication. And now she was an acceptable loss. "What do we do?" Talis asked, his voice breaking. Before Norvith could answer, the communication console chimed. She moved to it slowly, expecting another automated message explaining why they were being abandoned. Instead, a human face appeared on the screen. The woman was perhaps 40 years old by human standards, with dark skin, close-cropped hair, and eyes that carried the weight of command. She wore the uniform of the Terran Coalition Navy, rank insignia identifying her as a captain. "This is Captain Lyra Bennis of the TCS Valiant Hearts," the human said without preamble. "We are receiving the distress signal from Calthara Minor. How many souls are still on the planet?" Norvith felt her respiratory organs constrict with shock. 3,200,000. "But the Galactic Council has classified us as unrecoverable. There are no rescue operations authorized." "I did not ask what the Council authorized," Captain Bennis said, her voice hard as starship hull plating. "I asked how many people need rescue." 3,200,000, Norvith repeated, barely able to believe she was having this conversation. "But Captain, the planet will destabilize completely in 6 days. No fleet in the galaxy can evacuate that many people in such a short time frame." After the first 3 days, they had evacuated only 900,000 colonists. They were moving faster than any rescue operation in galactic history, but it was not fast enough. At the current rate, more than 1 million Salvari would still be on the planet when it destabilized. Norvith watched Captain Bennis staring at the logistics displays, her jaw clenched with frustration. The human had not slept in 60 hours. Neither had most of her crew. They were pushing themselves beyond rational limits, and it still was not enough. "We need more ships," Bennis said finally. "Send a general distress call to every vessel within 3 light years. Offer them hazard pay. Offer them salvage rights. Offer them whatever they want. We need cargo capacity." The responses came within hours. And they were devastating. Negative, Terran vessel. Calthara Minor is classified as a loss event. Insurance regulations prohibit entering the affected zone. Unable to assist. Corporate policy forbids rescue operations in destabilized systems. The Galactic Rescue Consortium has determined this colony is not economically viable for evacuation. We will not waste resources on doomed assets. One after another, ships refused. Some cited regulations. Some cited costs. Some simply stated they did not care enough to risk their vessels for strangers. Norvith saw something change in Captain Bennis after the last refusal. The human stood silently for a long moment, then activated a wideband transmission. "This is Captain Lyra Bennis of the Terran Coalition Navy to all ships, all species, all governments within range of this signal. Right now, on Kelthera Minor, there are over 2 million people who are going to die. Not because they did anything wrong. Not because they deserve it. But because the galaxy has decided they are not profitable enough to save. I am here to tell you that humanity rejects that calculus. We reject the idea that lives have different values based on economic utility. We reject the cold mathematics that says some people matter and some do not. If you have a ship, if you have cargo space, if you have any shred of compassion in whatever organs pump blood through your body, I am asking you to help. Not for profit. Not for glory. But because it is the right thing to do. Because we are all sharing this galaxy together, and if we cannot help each other when everything is on the line, then what are we even building out here? This is Captain Bennis. End transmission." Norvith felt her skin patterns flare with emotion she could barely name. The human had not appealed to logic or self-interest. She had appealed to something deeper. Something most galactic species had trained themselves to ignore. Shared decency. The responses were slow at first. A small independent hauler captain sent a message, "I have room for 5,000. Sending coordinates." Then another, freighter Dawnrunner inbound. "We can take 10,000 if we strip out cargo." Then more. And more. Within 12 hours, 47 ships had diverted to Kelthera Minor. They came from a dozen different species. Some were commercial vessels. Some were private yachts. Some were barely space-worthy transports held together with improvised repairs. But they came. Then we will have to work fast. Valiant Hearts is en route with our entire humanitarian operations group. 16 transport ships, 4 hospital ships, and a construction vessel. We will begin surface operations in 14 hours. Transmit coordinates for your largest population centers and prepare your people for immediate evacuation. The transmission ended before Norvith could respond. She stared at the blank screen, trying to process what had just happened. The Terran Coalition, humanity's interstellar government, had just committed to attempting the impossible. Evacuating 3 million people in less than a week with only 16 transport ships was logistically absurd. The mathematics did not work. The time constraints were impossible. But they were coming anyway. Who was that? Tallis asked. Humans, Norvith said quietly. The humans are coming. Within hours, the news spread across the colony. Reactions ranged from desperate hope to cynical dismissal. Many Salvari had heard stories about humanity, the strange bipedal species from the distant world called Earth who had joined galactic civilization only 80 years ago. They were known for emotional decision-making, for valuing sentiment over logic, for engaging in behaviors that more rational species found baffling. Like attempting to rescue 3 million abandoned colonists when every calculation said it was impossible. The Terran ships arrived exactly when promised. Norvith watched from the orbital station as 16 massive transport vessels entered orbit, their hulls painted with the blue and white insignia of the Terran humanitarian fleet. They were accompanied by medical ships marked with red crosses, an ancient human symbol meaning aid and protection. Captain Bennis established a command center on the surface within 2 hours. Norvith volunteered to serve as a liaison between the human rescuers and the Salvari colonists. When she met the captain in person, she was struck by the intensity that radiated from the woman. "Here is the situation," Bennis said without pleasantries, pulling up a holographic display of the colony. "We have 143 hours before planetary destabilization reaches critical levels. Our transports can carry approximately 20,000 people per trip. Each round trip to the nearest stable system takes 11 hours including loading and unloading. The numbers do not look good." "Then why are you here?" Norvith asked. "If you know the mathematics make success impossible, why attempt this at all?" Bennis looked at her with an expression that was equal parts determination and something Norvith could only describe as fierce compassion. Because the numbers say it is impossible does not mean we accept that answer. Humans have been defying impossible odds since we crawled out of caves and decided to reach for the stars. We do not abandon people because the spreadsheet says it is too hard. We find a way or we make one. That is illogical. Probably. But we are human. Logic is just the starting point. We add stubbornness, creativity, and the absolute refusal to let good people die when we have the capacity to help. Now let us get to work. The evacuation began immediately. Terran soldiers moved through the colony with efficient precision, organizing civilians into transport groups, prioritizing the young and elderly, ensuring families stayed together. Medical teams set up triage centers to treat injuries and stabilize those too ill to travel immediately. But the numbers remained brutally unforgiving. An elderly Kathrani merchant arrived with a ship designed to haul grain. I heard what the human captain said. My daughter lives on one of the border colonies. Someday she might need help. I want her to live in a galaxy where people still answer when someone calls for aid. A young Vrexian pilot brought her entire family's fishing fleet. We are small ships. We can only take a few hundred each. But we are here. Even some of the original refusers changed their minds. The insurance companies and corporate regulations meant nothing in the face of a simple question: what kind of person do you want to be? The evacuation accelerated. With the additional ships, they moved from 20,000 per cycle to 60,000. The numbers started to shift in their favor. Hope, that most dangerous of emotions, began to spread through the colony. But the planet was dying faster than predicted. On day 5, a massive seismic event cracked open one of the primary HAP complexes. 3,000 Salvari were trapped in the lower levels, surrounded by unstable rock that could collapse at any moment. The rescue ships could not land near the site, the ground was too unstable. We have to abandon them, one of the Terran engineers said, his voice hollow with despair. The structural integrity is at 15%. Any rescue attempt will likely trigger a total collapse. We could lose everyone. Captain Bennis studied the sensor data. How long would it take to shore up the main support columns? At least 8 hours. But Captain, we do not have the equipment for that kind of operation. And even if we did, the risk. I did not ask about the risk. I asked about the time. Get our construction vessel in position. Norvith, you are a structural engineer. Can you identify the critical load-bearing points? Norvith felt her entire body go cold. Yes. But Captain, the engineer is correct. This is almost certainly a suicide mission. The moment we start working on those supports, the whole complex could come down. Then we work fast, Bennis said. Get the construction crews suited up. We are bringing those people out. They dropped into the unstable HAP complex like an army descending into hell. The construction vessel deployed massive support pylons while teams of humans and Salvari volunteers worked to reinforce collapsing tunnels. The ground shook constantly. Rockfalls killed 2 human engineers and a Vrexian volunteer in the first hour. But they kept working. Norvith found herself welding emergency supports alongside a human named Rothkellen, a construction specialist who moved through the dangerous zone with calm efficiency. You did not have to come down here, she said as another tremor shook the tunnel. This is not your colony. These are not your people. Roth adjusted his welding torch and gave her a tired smile. Actually, they are. The moment your people needed help and we decided to answer, they became our people. That is how humanity works. We adopt you whether you want it or not. That is insane. Yeah. But it is also who we are. Now let us get these supports in place before the mountain falls on our heads. It took 7 hours and 53 minutes. 7 minutes before the engineers predicted total structural collapse, the last support pylon locked into place. The evacuation of the trapped colonists began immediately, even as the ground continued to shake. They got all 3,000 out. Not one was left behind. By day 6, they had evacuated 2,800,000 Salvari. 400,000 remained. The planetary core was approaching critical instability. They had perhaps 12 hours. Captain Bennis gathered the rescue fleet commanders. This is going to be close. We are going to push every ship to maximum capacity. We are going to run simultaneous loading operations at 6 sites. We are going to move so fast that safety protocols become suggestions. And we are going to get every single person off this rock before it explodes. Does anyone have a problem with that plan? No one did. The final evacuation was chaos given form. Ships landed and launched on cycles measured in minutes. Families were packed into cargo holds. Children were strapped to emergency seats. The elderly were carried aboard on stretchers. Every cubic meter of space was utilized. Norvith worked the loading operations until her body threatened to collapse from exhaustion. Around her, humans moved with the intensity of people who had bet everything on a single outcome and refused to lose. They lifted Salvari children onto ships. They sang songs to keep panicking colonists calm. They shared their rations with the hungry and their medical supplies with the injured. And they smiled. Even in the chaos, even facing exhaustion and danger, the humans smiled. With 2 hours remaining, the count dropped below 100,000. With 1 hour, below 50,000. The planet was screaming now, the seismic activity so intense that it registered on sensors across the system. Captain Bennis refused to leave until the last transport lifted off. She stood at the command post as the final groups loaded, counting down the numbers with the intensity of someone counting heartbeats. Last transport loaded, the operations officer called. That is everyone, Captain. We got them all. 3,200,000 souls. Every single one accounted for. They reached orbit with 47 minutes to spare. The fleet jumped to faster-than-light transit just as Kelthera Minor began its final destabilization. Through the viewports, they watched the planet tear itself apart, its surface cracking open like an egg as the core exploded outward. It was beautiful and terrible, the death of a world. But everyone who had lived there was safe. The refugee fleet arrived at Haven Station, a Terran facility built specifically to handle humanitarian crises. The Salvari colonists were given temporary housing, medical care, food, and the promise that humanity would help them find new homes. Norvith stood in the observation deck, watching his families reunited, as children played in safe environments for the first time in weeks, as the weight of impending death finally lifted from her people. Captain Bennis found her there. Thank you, Norvith said simply. I do not have words sufficient to express what you have done. You do not need to thank us, Bennis replied. You needed help. We gave it. That is what neighbors do. We are not neighbors. Our species barely knew each other before this. Now we do. And that makes you neighbors. Maybe even friends. Norvith felt her skin patterns shift through colors representing emotions the Salvari language did not have names for. The Galactic Council abandoned us. They calculated our worth and found us wanting. But humanity looked at the same numbers and made a different choice. Why? What is the human philosophy that makes you value life so differently? Bennis was quiet for a long moment. My grandmother used to tell me a story. Thousands of years ago, long before humans reached the stars, there was a massive flood. People were trapped on rooftops, surrounded by rising water. They were going to die. And then boats came. Regular people with small boats, fishing vessels, personal watercraft, anything that floated. They came from all over, without being asked, without being paid, just to help. They saved thousands of lives. My grandmother said that was the moment she truly understood what it meant to be human. We are the species that shows up with boats when the waters rise. That is our philosophy. That is who we are. Even when the mathematics say it is impossible? Especially then. The harder the challenge, the more we are compelled to try. We do not believe in acceptable losses. We believe in fighting for every life, every time, no matter the cost. Is it logical?
Probably not. Is it efficient? Definitely not. But it is right. And for humans, right matters more than smart.
Over the following weeks, news of the Kelphara minor evacuation spread throughout the galaxy. The Galactic Council tried to frame it as a reckless waste of resources. They issued statements about the dangers of setting precedents that encouraged settlement of unstable worlds. But the people of the galaxy saw something different. They saw a species that had answered a call for help when no one else would. They saw volunteers from multiple species who had come together for no reason other than shared compassion. They saw what galactic civilization could be when profit margins were not the only measure of value. Immigration applications to human colonies increased by 300%. Multiple species requested cultural exchange programs to understand human philosophy better. And quietly, without fanfare, other governments began reviewing their own emergency response protocols. The Salvari were granted asylum in Terran space. Many chose to remain, integrating into human colonies. Others eventually founded new settlements with human assistance. Norvith and her brother Tali stayed on Haven Station, where she worked on designing better emergency habitat systems. 6 months after the evacuation, Norvith attended a memorial ceremony for the 7 volunteers who had died during the rescue operations. 2 humans, 2 Vrexians, a Kathrani, a Dorvathi, and a Salvari who had refused to leave without helping. Their names were inscribed on a monument that simply read, "They showed up when others turned away." Captain Bennis gave the eulogy. These 7 people did not have to come to Kelphara Minor. No one ordered them. No one paid them. They came because they heard someone ask for help and they could not turn away. That is the highest form of courage. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. We honor them not just for what they did, but for what they represent. The belief that we are all connected. That helping a stranger in another star system matters just as much as helping a neighbor down the street. That when someone calls out in the dark, someone should answer. They answered. And because they did, 3 million people who were supposed to die are alive today. After the ceremony, Norvith stood before the monument for a long time. Talis joined her, his crystalline patterns now bright with health and hope. "Do you think they knew?" he asked quietly. "The people who died. Do you think they knew how many lives they would save?" "I think they did not care about the numbers," Norvith said. "They cared that people needed help. That was enough." Is that what makes someone a hero? Not caring about the odds? Norvith thought about Captain Bennis's words. About the boats that came when the waters rose. About a species that measured success not in profits but in lives saved. "Yes," she said finally. "That is exactly what makes someone a hero. The willingness to show up when everything says you should stay away. The refusal to accept that some people matter more than others. The simple, stubborn insistence that right is more important than smart. That is what heroes do. And that is what the humans taught us." She looked up at the stars, at the vast galaxy that humanity had joined less than a century ago. A galaxy that was slowly learning what it meant when humans made a promise. No one gets left behind. No one is an acceptable loss. When you call for help, someone will answer. That was the human way. Illogical. Inefficient. Expensive. Dangerous. And absolutely, undeniably right. Somewhere out there, on worlds Norvith would never see, other crises would arise. Other people would face impossible odds. Other governments would calculate costs and declare entire populations unrecoverable. And humanity would show up with boats. Because that was who they were. The species that answered when others turned away. The ones who looked at impossible mathematics and said, "Watch us anyway." The neighbors who adopted strangers and called them family. Norvith smiled, her skin patterns shifting to colors that meant hope and gratitude and the quiet certainty that the galaxy had changed. The humans had shown them that there was another way. A harder way. A more expensive way. But a better way. And once you knew that path existed, you could never go back to accepting the cold calculations that said some lives did not matter.
The galaxy was learning that lesson, one rescue at a time. And it all started because one human captain looked at 3 million abandoned people and said the only words that truly mattered. You are not alone. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video and subscribe for more. Thank you.